Joining me in studio this morning, Russell Singleton. He's a physician assistant from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Tripp Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street. That would be on the north side of the city, directly across from the main post office. First of all, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I don't know if that's your microphone. Try again.
Good to be here.
There it goes. I had to turn it up a little bit. Um, we're talking today about a subject that a lot of people do work in the healthcare industry. I think we're all aware of that in the sense that, that it's such a growing industry. I can remember for years I'd go out and I would do stories with a guy at the local labor department about jobs, and he always tried to say, well, look, as bad as things can be, he said there's always areas of growth, and the one specifically he would always reference would be healthcare professions. And I don't think much has changed there. On the other hand, there's a lot of job stress involved for people who are actually working in a doctor's office or a hospital setting or the paramedics out on the roads.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that is our topic today, caregiver burnout. And I did want to address the way that this affects physicians and PAs and nurses and other providers. Before we got to that, I wanted to focus a little bit more on how that affects um, children who care for adult parents, or parents who care for disabled children, or family members who care for any loved one that has a chronic illness or a condition or a
That's a seven
disability.
day a week job.
Well, it is, and I think that a misunderstanding of the work and the effort that is required, both on the part of the caregiver and the general public, really sets people up for burnout, and it can become quite serious to the point where the caregiver actually not only experiences symptoms of depression, but they can become physically ill because of self neglect.
I've had people in studio before, and what they try and do is find other other folks in the community who can come in sometimes and look after that family member just to give somebody a 2 or 3 day break, with the goal being that if they can get away for a couple of days and they can go to Salt Lake City or Reno and just somewhere and relax, maybe at a spa or a hotel or even at the home still, but just to have a couple of days where they have a few minutes to sit down and decompress on their own. That's a huge need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to talk about that very same thing today. But first, I wanted to give listeners an idea of what caregiver burnout really is. And I guess we could define it as a state of physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion that can be accompanied by a change in attitude or symptoms of depression. And again, it can lead to physical illness. You might notice these symptoms in yourself, or you might notice these symptoms in a friend or a family member, but they start to withdraw. They start to lose interest in activities that they previously enjoyed. They start to feel irritable. They may eat more, eat less, gain weight, lose weight, sleep more, sleep less, and you may notice that they get sick more often. I wouldn't suggest that people who get sick often probably have some type of a depression or a burnout syndrome, but certainly that is a possibility for people who work themselves into exhaustion.
My mother had a cousin who ended up with dementia, and because her family was so scattered around the country, my mom ended up being the primary caregiver in that situation. And my mother, uh, her cousin Dorothy died, and my mother was dead within a few months afterwards. And I can recall my mother explaining to me that Dorothy would wake up in the middle of the night and think there were people in the house, and and was having memory issues. But my mother wasn't getting any sleep either through all of this because she had a day job too as well, and I think that that may have contributed to her decline as well. So when you mention this happens, it can be very, very serious.
Well, and that's just it. I don't think many caregivers, if any, plan for this. I don't think they prepare for this. I don't think they seek after this. It's inevitably thrust upon them because of an illness in the family or a child with a disability, and that leads to several significant issues. For example, the first one is what we call role confusion. So, I think in the case you were giving, we have a child taking care of a parent who then undergoes some role confusion. They're no longer a child. In a sense, they are the parent. They're the nurse. They're the doctor. They're taking care of every little thing that normally as a child they wouldn't do. And we can see that between spouses too. When one spouse has a progressive illness or a terminal illness like cancer or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, you're no longer with a companion, a friend, a helpmeet, a lover. You're with um, someone who you have to take care of, and you really lose that companionship, and it results in this role confusion that I think is the very beginning of caregiver burnout.
I started to see a little bit of that even with my own father when his health took a turn, and my sister and I had to, deal with that considerably. She much more than I did, and it is very difficult because all of a sudden this person who was such a towering figure, um, you just it is very confusing. We've got a short break. More with Russell Singleton coming up in just a moment. He's joining us from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. And we've got another 20 minutes of the show still ahead. Better health with Tripp Family Medicine. And I've got to remind you, great slogan they have at the office: life's too short not to feel good. Our studio guest, Russell Singleton. He's a physician assistant from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. And we do this every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And I think we may have a telephone caller looking to join us because we're talking about issues related to medical care burnout, and that can be even as a family member who is offering care to somebody at home. And we have a caller with us. Just a quick note before I get to the caller. Telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300. And caller, you're up next on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com.
Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I'm in the same situation. I'm taking care of my father that lives with me. He's 93. Fortunately, he's still able to dress himself and things. But like the doctor says, you do need to get yourself a break somehow. Whether go read a book for a little bit, run an errand where he's already maybe taking a nap or something. But you do need that break. 'Cause I've been taking care of him for several years, and like the doctor says, you need to find some way to get a break to give yourself a little rest. And I just want to make that comment. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thinking about that too. Somebody might just want to drive down to McDonald's and get a cup of coffee or a Coke or something and sit down for 5 minutes and read the newspaper. Just that sometimes, and that short trip might be the thing to give you that peace of mind through the rest of the day.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I really appreciate that call. Um, I think you have a problem when the idea of doing something for yourself or taking some time for yourself makes you feel guilty because of the commitment that you have to this loved one. And it is really important that no matter what, you find some time for yourself and not just to sleep well, to eat well, to exercise things you should be doing anyways, but to recreate, to go out and get a cup of coffee, spend time with a friend, go to the gym or I don't know, whatever you like to do because like you just said, life is too short not to feel good and you're doing a great thing, making a tremendous sacrifice for this loved one, but you cannot sacrifice your own life for theirs. There has to be a happy medium. You have to balance. You're already doing something so great. Don't forget yourself. So I appreciate that call. I couldn't agree more.
Now, we were talking as well, other people who go through this, people who are just working in an office setting or working in a hospital. I was talking to a friend the other day who's been in nursing since 1974, I believe. And the stress in her life has been obvious for a long, long time. And she's nearing retirement, but the fact of the matter is she's been working in a setting where she befriends the patients, and then working in a nursing home, they die, and that seeing that on an almost daily basis, there's got to be it's gut wrenching, but it's got to take an emotional toll.
Yeah, we have to talk about expectations for sure. Whether you're a professional caregiver or a family member or a friend, you have to have realistic expectations. For example, some conditions are not going to get better. And in fact, they're going to get worse day by day. They're going to get worse. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, for example, um, metastatic cancer that has already spread throughout the body. I'm not saying that it's not worth trying to alleviate pain and suffering, to maybe try and walk the condition back a little bit, but You have to understand that even though your efforts may not be reflected in the health of the patient as their condition continues to follow its natural course, that you are still doing a good thing. Um, so having realistic expectations about what this individual is going to go through, I think, is incredibly important, especially um, as a practitioner and as a nurse. And you know, I thought of another thing as you were telling that story, Bill. Are you a baseball fan?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, what do you think is a good batting average?
The big stars will have an average around 330 or higher, and then, but anybody really who's above 250 is generally considered a pretty steady hitter.
Okay, now for those of us who don't know baseball, can you explain what that really means if you have a batting average of 250 or 300?
Right at 250, you basically get a hit every fourth at bat, and at 330 you'd be every third at bat.
Okay, so that still tells me that you're missing the majority of the balls thrown at you, right?
Right.
How would you feel if you're in the operating room and the surgeon walks in and says, "Don't worry, I'm batting 300 on gallbladders. I'm batting 250 on appendixes." For baseball, that's amazing. I mean, that is an all-star. I think what Ty Cobb probably has one of the highest batting average over a lifetime, and it was like 30, 360 or something like that. But that's not the way it is in healthcare. You're expected to bat 1,000 every time, and it just doesn't work that way. Yeah, because we're human too, and we make mistakes, and yes, we should be held to a high standard, and there's no excuse for for malpractice, but humans of all shapes and sizes make mistakes. And so, as a caregiver who may or may not have professional training, you have to realize that you're not perfect. You can do what you can, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have feelings of resentment, for example. You're going to be angry at this loved one, and how guilty can that make you feel that this person who you're supposed to love, you now resent?
You've got people who are coming into. I know the doctor has mentioned in the past that he's had worked ER. You've got a lot of people who are working in early careers and sometimes entire careers in emergency rooms. My gosh, what comes through there has to be uh, on a daily basis, so much of it gut wrenching. And I've read stories where, for instance, nurses have a high rate of addictions with cigarettes and things like that because they're trying to deal with that stress level and they're self-medicating.
Yeah, I think a parallel between that example and our home caregivers is a lack of control. Again, as physicians and practitioners, we sometimes expect to be perfect and to do everything when it is required and to do it perfectly. We don't have that type of control, and as a lay caregiver, the case is even more evident that you just don't have that type of control. Um, and then what about lack of other resources, material resources? How often are you financially prepared to take care of a loved one? How often do you have the the home laid out in just the right way so it's ADA accessible? These are resources that you probably don't have.
If you have a relative, and I used the example of dementia earlier, at least you know that how this is going to play out. But if you've got a relative who suddenly had a massive stroke or was diagnosed with cancer that's already at a pretty high stage, there's no gradual easing into this. You're dealing with that from it's like a light switch has just
Yeah.
gone on, and you're dealing with it every day at a high level.
Yeah, and that again is just par for the course when it comes to burnout. It's a shock. So in the last couple of minutes, let's talk about a few more things that caregivers can do. So the first example we heard from a caller was to make time for yourself, and I could not agree more. The next thing I would say is that you need to have a friend of your own. You need to have a confidant, someone who you trust, a coworker, a neighbor, a family member who you can talk to. You can't keep these things bottled up inside. You've got to get some stuff off your chest. We talked about realistic expectations. I think that's important. Um, and again, not forgetting about yourself, but you may want to employ the help of a professional. You may want to talk to a counselor, to a therapist, or a social worker, a clergy member, someone who can help give you perspective and remind you of some of the things that we've talked about today. And then I definitely wanted to talk about respite care services. There are organizations, there are businesses that are built around providing care to these types of individuals and relieving caregivers. So we could be talking about a short stay at a nursing home or assisted living facility. They have adult daycare by trained uh, professionals. And if you're looking for those options locally and it applies to you, one of the first places you could call is the CSI Office on Aging, and they can help connect you with resources and these respite care services if the person you're caring for is indeed an elder.
Now, when we talk a little bit about how people on the outside have to deal with this, and there are people that are willing to step in and give them an assist and give them a break now and then. But for those people who are working, and some of these people in the medical professions, because the demands, there's mandatory overtime. Uh, a lot of people are working long hours. They don't necessarily have the ability to just take a couple of days off and have someone come in and, to use another baseball analogy, pinch hit.
Yeah, and to address that issue in in medicine, there have been rules and regulations passed down to limit the number of hours that a medical resident can work. For example, if I'm not mistaken, I think the cap is supposed to be 80 hours a week, but commonly and historically, medical residents and other trainees are working 100 hours a week. They're working 120 hours a week. And we know what sleep deprivation does to the mind, and we know that poor medical decisions are being made because of sleep deprivation, but it's part of our culture, unfortunately. So the quicker we all realize this, that caregivers, professionals and non-professionals alike, can burn out, the quicker we're going to start looking for solutions and really ending up with better care and healthier individuals.
Russell Singleton is in studio with us today from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. We're at 8:53 and we've got 29. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. If I could for a moment, first of all, contact information at the office. How do people get in touch with you there?
Give us a call, 933-4400. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well.
And that's Tripp with two P's for those folks out there who are looking for that. I've got a question that I think especially when you're working in a smaller community. If you're working in Seattle or Salt Lake City, a lot of the people coming to your office, you only know them as a patient. But in places like Twin Falls, in Jerome, and Buell, and Rupert, and Burley, you know a lot of these people from church, their neighbors, their families who go to school with your own children. That in itself, when you have to look somebody in the eye sometimes and give them some bad news, I would imagine can also be very difficult.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case, and some patients not understanding the burden and the daily stress will be kind of critical of caregivers that appear maybe stoic or apathetic or kind of distant. I think some of them, and us, I should say, myself included, have to find a way to distance ourselves for a certain or to a certain extent because we physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually cannot ride that roller coaster every single day like a lot of these caregivers are asked to do. And so sometimes we do have to kind of build a little wall, maintain some objectivity to try and give the patient the best care, the best possible answer to their dilemma.
Got a couple of minutes to go, and we have a caller joining us on Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Caller, you're on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Doc. I have a question for you. My daughter's a physician assistant in Colorado, and last time she saw this young baby about 3 years old, weighing 90 pounds. And so she had to call Child Protective Services on the mother because she was not even getting bathed or nothing. So I was just wondering, how often do you see these kind of psychological and behavioral problems with drugs or whatever it may be that parents sometimes, under stress, how often do you see in that kind of a slump hit? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And first of all, I just have to say PAs are the best, by the way. But um, yeah, that's really difficult. I have cases like this almost every day where I have children who may or may not be receiving adequate care, where parents may be purposefully or maybe unintentionally neglectful. And I have had to call CPS several times in my career. I've had to call Adult Protective Services several times in my career. I've had to have um, a, a sheriff's deputy escort someone from the office to the emergency room because they were acutely suicidal. And they would tell me that should I let them leave the office, they were going to hurt themselves. And again, I don't know that anyone's really prepared for that because most of us go into medicine wanting to help people, to make a positive impact. But when you get in these situations that seem so hopeless, it's hard to not only remain objective, but to stay positive and to see how you can help. So I don't know that I have a lot of suggestions, except you have to just keep trying, do everything you can within reason. But again, don't sacrifice your own health or well-being for that, because then you won't be able to help anyone.
I was going to say we've got to wrap up, but I think from the distance of your office to the movie theater, I'd be looking to decompress a lot of comedies after I got out of work. Just something as a way to, just as a break.
I'll meet you there.
We want to thank Russell for dropping by today. And again, what's the number at the office?
933-4400. If you call early, there's a great chance we can get you in today.
And we wanted to point out they're located at Tripp Family Medicine, directly across from the main post office on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls. Short break. News coming up in just a moment from Fox here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.